Good afternoon, everyone. Your attention, please. We're going to start. I'll introduce myself and then very briefly the panel. But thanks very much for coming today to this session on sustainable production, which is a increasingly important and talked about topic, I think, in all industries, not least film and TV. My name's Ben Twist. I'm the Director of Creative Carbon Scotland, which is a charity working with the art, screen and creative industries in Scotland. Mostly, I have to say, with the subsidised arts. That's where we've done most of our work, but we've also done some work on screen. And we make connections between climate change on one hand and culture on the other. So we seek to harness the influencing power of culture, importantly, to bring about the transformation in society which needs to happen and is beginning to happen. And we also help cultural organisations of various sorts not only reduce their carbon emissions, which is important and everybody talks about all the time, but also adapt to the impacts of climate change, which is increasingly important. And if you've been reading the papers, despite Ukraine last week, you'll have seen the report from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, about adaptation. And that really demonstrates the need to adapt to the impacts of climate change that are already happening, not only in the global south, but around us here as well. And that in itself, that in turn, reminds us of the importance to cut those carbon emissions so that we don't make it worse. I've got an interesting and fine panel here today. One person's missing, I'm afraid, from the press, so you'll have to forgive Katie Talon, who's the industry sustainability manager for Albert. She can't be here for various reasons. But we do have Marie-Claire Bowser, who's the screen sustainability manager for BECTU Vision, and I might mention the report that has engendered Marie-Claire's role. We've got Louise V. Say, who's a producer on Shetland 6 and 7, I see. And we've got Caris Pittendry, who's Screen Commission Officer at Screen Scotland. They've all got various things to say, but I will try to set the scene a little bit. For those of you who are not in Scotland, normally, you may or may not be aware that Scotland has an earlier target to get to net zero than the rest of the UK. We're committed to a net zero target by 2045 rather than 2050 for the rest of the UK. And that's partly because we have a great deal of opportunity to sequester carbon in tree planting and perhaps more particularly peat bog restoration in Scotland. But also I'd like to think that it's because Scotland is a little bit ahead of the other nations in the UK. There's something that happened in 2009 when the Climate Change Act in Scotland was passed, which is that it was passed unanimously by the Scottish Parliament. And actually the Parliament upped the levels of ambition of the Act from where the government originally planned it, I think. So from the beginning, there was a real unanimity in Scotland politically, and I think that's fed into a social and a broader awareness and commitment to acting on climate change than perhaps has been the case in England, Wales and Northern Ireland. So I think we've got a bit of an advantage there. So maybe that's also the reason why we've got that target of 2045. Not to be outdone, the cities of Glasgow and Edinburgh have said, well, bugger that, we're going to go for 2030. So they're really going for it. And I should say that's going to be very, very hard to meet, indeed. 2045 is hard enough. 2030 is going to be very tricky, but it affects quite a lot of the screen industry in Scotland, a lot of which is based in the two cities. That difficulty of hitting the 2045 target or the 2030 target sort of underlines the fact that everybody is going to have to play a part in this. There's no part of society, no industry, no sector that cannot be part of the solution here. And I think that's absolutely the case for the screen industry, which has an enormous role to play in influencing society, changing the stories that we tell ourselves, changing the stories by which we live, I think, but also a very big role to play in just making sure that it's working so effectively and efficiently, and it's really bearing down on those carbon emissions. The screen industry also has a wide, it's like an octopus. It has tentacles into all sorts of other sectors, into transport, into generator hire, into catering, all sorts of other worlds. There are lots of people, as you know far better than I do, who work in the screen industry some of the time, but are also doing other things the rest of the time. And I think there, the screen industry, as a buyer of supplies, a buyer of services, has the opportunity to ask those other bits of society to join in. What are they doing? We're looking for green services. We're looking for zero carbon services and facilities. So there's an opportunity there to influence the rest of industry, the rest of commerce, as well as society. So there's great opportunities here, great things to do, great work to make, great opportunities to influence the people you work with, but also opportunities to change internally. Mary Claire and I wrote a report back in 2019?
19 and 2020.
On greening the screen industry in Scotland. And I'm very pleased to say, every now and then, one of those things you do actually turns into action. And one of the things that happened was that our colleagues from BECTU Vision, Linda sitting in the front row there, have taken on the role of housing a screen sustainability manager, Mary Claire, and this is a pilot project, and we're confident, I think, that this will continue and grow because there's a lot of work that needs to be done. I think that's enough from me for now. So what I'm going to do is ask the team here to talk a little bit about the current state of sustainable filmmaking in Scotland. So, Caris, can I come first to you? What's Screen Scotland's role in this? What are you doing? What would you like to see happen, and so on? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so for those who don't know, Screen Scotland, we sit within Creative Scotland, which is National Agency for the Arts, and Creative Industries. We're funded by Scottish Government and the National Lottery to support the arts and to help grow all of the creative sectors here in Scotland. So when it comes to sustainability, Screen Scotland definitely has the role of supporting the sector to achieve the ambitions that they're already working towards, but then obviously with the report that we asked you to deliver last year, making sure that it's actually achieved. I think in general we're here to support and make sure that all the collaboration happens and make sure that people have the tools that they need to be sustainable. For us, we cross not just film production, but we're also festivals, we're also audiences, skills, training, film education. We have projects going into primary schools and secondary schools. We're kind of about sustainability of a screen industry as a whole, not just film production. And I think it's important that we're here to kind of make sure that everyone has access to the sector and to be sustainable and has the tools that they need, whether you're a cinema, a film production company, whether you're a school wanting to make a film project. It's our role to make sure that everyone has access and be as inclusive as it can be.
And one thing, you may or may not have anything to say about this, but one thing, I was speaking to the board of Creative Scotland, that includes the board of Screen Scotland in a way, and when I'm doing some more work for them recently, I said, you've got a choice here. Do you want to encourage culture to support the cultural sector, the arts, screen and creative industries, to comply with the new targets, or do you want them to be an agent of change? And the board said we want them to be an agent of change. So I'll just throw that in. I don't know whether, Caris, that touches upon anything you're thinking about there. Or
Yeah, no, totally. I think film and TV, it's probably the most accessed art form. Everyone watches TV, everyone goes and sees movies. Everyone, well, not everyone, but a lot of people have cameras on their phones now and they'll make little movies. It's probably the one art form that people engage with the most. And with the arts in general, we have the ability to reach communities and individuals that maybe wouldn't normally engage with climate action. And yeah, I think it is such a great tool to reach people and places and communities all over Scotland in an interesting and exciting way. I think the arts in general, we're just the best, aren't we?
I have a dream that long-running series in Scotland should have a climate change consultant on, a storyliner working on them, so that actually in every episode, in every moment of it, climate change should be there one way or another. Not as the big, doesn't need to be the big thing this week, or doesn't need to be the big story, but it's sort of there in the background. And you can talk about that later if you wish.
I think it's like normalising.
Absolutely
behaviours.
normalising, but it's like the Archers has an agricultural consultant, who's constantly making sure that things are right, but also is just making sure the agricultural message is there. I think we could be doing the same on River City and the other things as well, because it's a good way to get to all sorts of people who, as you say, are not thinking about climate change. Mary Claire, would you like to talk about your role?
I will do, and I think it's probably worth me giving a bit of context to how I came to the role, because I'm actually from a very different background. I went to art school and studied in costume design, so thought I wanted to become a costume designer. We had World War Z come to Glasgow in 2011. This was one of the first traineeships I had in the film industry. Emailed everyone from costume, nobody replied, so I was like, I'll try art department. Ended up in art department, and was just, from the word go, just amazed and just kind of in shock at the levels of waste that were coming out of art department. So I'm from a very make-do and mend family. We had literally 7 recycling bins for general household waste, but this was going into set decoration departments that were literally we're sourcing everything. If this was a set, literally everything would be sourced. So there was no routes of redistribution for where these things went to. I'm also kind of generally pretty social conscious as well, so I see kind of waste as being as much not just about a climate emissions problem, but actually as much a social issue. It's like if we've got families in poverty, we've obviously got many intersections of refugee crisis happening right now, especially women escaping domestic violence, etc., etc. So I was seeing this kind of thing that was happening as a problem in one sector, where it's like the main problem is time. It's like the productions are we are so rushed for time, we're just whatever as fast as, we don't really care, we're on to the next set. So I was seeing this as actually, but there's also a space where these things are in need. So I just couldn't believe it, and at that time nobody was really doing much. Albert had started, but they were very early days, and it was one guy doing the whole of the UK, so it was obviously they hadn't yet had much kind of influence in the industry, and even now they've had quite a good foothold into television production, but they've not yet had much of a foothold into the film industry, specifically feature films, for various reasons. So I've kind of been engaged with it since 2011, and by complete coincidence came into contact with Ben Twist, and he very kindly put me forward for a scholarship to do a master's degree in environmental management, but whilst I was still working in industry. So I've been working as a props buyer and set decorator for the last 10 years, and literally up until I started this job in December. And Ben, after I finished the master's degree, Ben invited me to join Creative Carbon Scotland to write the report for Screen Scotland 2019-2020, which I know it sounds super corrupt, but as one of the recommendations in the report was for this role to exist, which I incidentally ended up getting, but that wasn't the intention.
Really wasn't like that, I promise.
It was more the opposite. I kind of feel like I wanted to be a designer. I love the creative arts. I love that job in terms of I got paid to shop. It was amazing, but it also was there's a major problem that's not being addressed, and it's I couldn't ignore that, and I thought actually there's so much work to be done, and this needs to be looked at, so ended up applying for it. So yeah, so it was literally shopping for work-related dildos for Sylvester Stallone only literally a couple of weeks before I ended up in this job, so it's quite a change of path, but anyway.
Well, maybe not.
Yeah, exactly. There's probably also a lot of similarities. But anyway, so the main thing that I kind of realised from working on productions was that there's still a lot that the productions themselves can do, but we've not actually equipped them that well with how they can deliver it. So we've said basically so far, you should be green, but good luck. And so the first thing for my role is going to be looking at production processes and actually equipping productions with, first of all, suppliers lists for Scotland specifically. It's the regional detail that we need to say what are the different suppliers and supply chains in Scotland that we can equip productions with, and that's also partly invigorating these supply chains, because actually we need the technology to be mobile and to be relative to the screen sector, which is different from other industries and other ways of working. The second aspect I'm looking at is infrastructure, so that's looking at the studio processes and the networks of studios in Scotland. So how creating a space for shared learning amongst the studios. We're going to start with Albert's studio scorecard as a basis, but I want to add in the regional detail to that. So that's like local council tie-ins, national strategies, and find out where those intersections are that we can bring it all together. And then the last aspect is content. So that's looking at what we make in Scotland, and again looking at sustainability. I see sustainability as like a hierarchy of needs, so it's got to take every social justice issue with it in the quest for reducing emissions, because ultimately it's all about quality of life for people. I want to see in the future, but obviously we're already experiencing the impacts of climate change, so looking at it from that respect, but also thinking about, like, obviously a major reason for productions to film in Scotland is our beautiful landscapes. So how do we protect them in using them in content? So that's a very quick overview of kind of what I'm looking at in the role, but I would say the main aspect I want to communicate is what we were aware of in the report that we wrote, that there is a role for the productions themselves to take responsibility, but there are legitimate barriers to them fully transitioning to net zero, and we need that kind of extra systemic change that's I'm basically acting as a bridge between the industry itself and the policy makers and the infrastructure above it to help the industry transition. So yeah.
And you'll have gathered that Marie-Claire started 3 months ago or something?
Yeah.
I don't think she's slept yet, because she's done an extraordinary amount of work. And well, I was at a steering group meeting the other day, and I left exhausted. But I think there is a vast amount to do, partly because of that systemic nature of the industry, that it connects up with so many different parts. And just on that, could you raise your hand if you know what Albert is and you don't need us to talk about it? Right, there are one or two people who don't. So we don't have the Albert person here. I am not an expert, so I'll give a little bit, and I hope that my colleagues will join us in this. So Albert is a consortium which includes BBC, Channel 4, I want to say Sky, possibly even Netflix these days, and is managed by BAFTA. And it is it's the sustainability sort of vehicle, if you like, for the screen industry in the UK. And it's been going 10 years or something. And you'll see more and more at the now on TV programs. You'll see at the end on the credits there's an Albert Sustainable Certified Production or something. There's a little, like a cross fingers logo or something. There are a couple of parts to this. There's some training that people can go through to understand. They get a day-long training to understand how to work sustainably. But there's also an accreditation process that productions can go through, that you measure your carbon emissions and you report back centrally, and people check up on them and what have you. There's also some work that, as Marie-Claire has touched upon, I think, on content. So Albert is talking about increasing awareness amongst writers and directors and designers of the things that need to be said and done. There may be other things that are going on, and I'm now running out, so I shall just check from Louise. You haven't said anything yet. Is there anything else we should know about Albert?
Well, it's a great tool for productions to be guided by what they should be aiming for, really. And of course, it really depends on the nature of production, the extent to which you can fulfill what Albert wants. I mean, for Shetland, obviously the clue is almost in the title. Our challenge is that we run a show that is filmed up in Shetland, which is an island which is 13 hours away by sea from Aberdeen, or a flight from Glasgow, Edinburgh, Inverness. So, you know, we have our challenges. I mean, in terms of our big picture, Shetland is produced by Silverprint Studios, which is part of ITV Studios So although it's for the BBC, it's an ITV production. And ITV themselves have a really strong policy to try and move to net zero by 2030. So that's kind of an overall context. Shetland, we shoot, each series takes about 16 weeks to film. We shoot in Shetland for 6 of those weeks, and then the remainder is split between studio and Glasgow, Glasgow being a lookalike for Shetland. It's the extent to which we can have...
Glasgow is a lookalike for Shetland.
Oh,
That's
yes.
a new one on me.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Well, interiors of houses,
All right,
that
okay,
kind of
fair
thing. Yeah, we're very clever about
Yeah.
but, you know, I can speak, you know, for my team, we're all really keen, you know, to do what we can. There is actually a genuine will there. But often we come up against barriers. Infrastructure, are there enough car charging points? Can we hire electric cars even from a vehicle hire company? They're very few and far between. On an island like Shetland, when we're working in a really remote area, it will be difficult for us to recharge a car. And that's just one example of infrastructure kind of holding us back, really, or not having sufficient time to research supply chains properly, which is why Marie-Claire's, you know, is the answer to my prayers, really, because I want to do more. But often when you're in a tight schedule in pre-production, we'll have 9 or 10 weeks before we start filming. We honestly, hand on heart, don't have the time to research all the options. We did look this time at biofuel jennies for Shetland, but we really couldn't source them in Scotland. Bridgerton are piloting a hydrogen-powered generator at the moment. Great. These are small steps, but we all want to take these steps because when all these small steps add together, it has a big impact. Travel is our Achilles heel, really. So we had a very firm policy on Shetland that any actors coming up from London would travel by train, not by air. So that was a significant shift for us in season 6 and 7. Which I think, you know, we're quite proud of coordinating. It might sound like a small thing, but it has an impact on schedules, and we have to think about things really carefully.
Can I just ask, this may be of interest to people, do the actors mind? Do they like it? Do they hate it?
No,
Do
I think
they
they're
like
okay
the
about
ship?
it. No, honestly, the team would explain why, and they were all fine. Honestly, there is a will. That's what I'm saying. There is almost like a universal will to do our bit.
I think that's a really important thing to remember, that actually that's what we found at Creative Carbon Scotland generally, that people are often worried that others are not going to accept this, and they may be worried about how to do it. People may be worried about how to do it, but often they would like to do it and need the information or need the help, or sometimes need to be paid the extra day or whatever it may be that it takes. So I think that's really worth remembering.
Yeah.
Sorry, I interrupted.
We have a commitment on Shetland to hire as many local crew locally and cast locally as possible, and that also reduces our carbon footprint. It's important for us, not just from a talent point of view, but from a sustainable point of view to do that. I haven't been up and down to London for editorial meetings. I've not seen my exec producer in 3D for 2.5 years. So everything is done by Zoom, mainly because of COVID. And this is a positive spin-off of COVID, in that we now are quite happy to do editorial reviews in post-production or production meetings. Even our read-throughs happen via Zoom, cutting down on our, you know, all helping our sustainable footprint, if you like. We made a specific decision to have a more LED-heavy lighting rig in studio, thereby reducing our electricity bill, which is great for production, even though the outlay initially was higher. And that was a specific decision made for Albert. Basically, we made that decision quite early on. But getting enough LED lighting panels in Scotland, a lot of productions are demanding the same kit from a small pool. So again, we came up against infrastructure. Can we get hold of, please, can we have more LED lighting panels of various sizes in Scotland so we can hire them? So there was all of that happening. We were mainly a paperless production, so we, again, another positive spin-off for COVID. If you leave scripts hanging around, it could carry the COVID virus. So, but it also had a spin-off for us for sustainable production. recycling, not just bottles and all that usual kind of thing, but our sets, we have a big set of our police HQ and various other sets that are flat packed and stored and then reassembled every time. So we're not building a fresh set every time, it's stored and then reused and patched up, because actually the initial set was made just for the pilot and it's going 7 seasons later. Very proud of that set.
Quality of making.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and our costume department will either buy predominantly from second-hand shops and then donate back to charities and second-hand shops. So we have that kind of, that's a kind of an ethical as well as a sustainable reason for doing that. I think the big thing is I would love is to have the opportunity to hire more electric cars but again, the vehicle hire companies don't have enough, and there aren't enough charge points around, particularly in remote areas, for us to do that. So there are lots of things that I would like to do, but we feel held back by the supply chain not fulfilling what we need, or the infrastructure just not being there.
And I think that's certainly part of your role, isn't it, Marie-Claire, to bring that awareness to the industries, to those hire companies, what have you, that they're just knowing, I suppose, that there are this many productions in the average year in Scotland, and this many electric cars may be needed, or whatever it may be. And talking to Shetland Council about the charging points, for example, because these things can only happen through communication. And I think it really demonstrates the interconnected nature of the screen industry with all those other bits of the world, which does make it so difficult. And the complexity of the system is hard. Marie-Claire, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I was just writing it down so I remembered. So actually just touching on something that you were asking Louise about CAST, and I don't really have a kind of conclusion about this, it's just an awareness, but I'm aware of an example that's happened in Wales of them putting an electric charging hub into their car park, but it was explicitly because their lead cast member drove an electric car. So that was something that I was like, well, first of all, that shows huge influence of the cast over what happens on a production. And as an industry, we move mountains for things to happen in very, very short amounts of time. So the capacity for the industry to actually not only change itself, but actually contribute something into society. In what happened from that actor making that, asking for that for his specific car, I think they did put in a few more for the crew as well. But that means that after that production doing that to reduce their own impact, when they left, that meant there was an infrastructural positive legacy in that space for filming. So it meant other productions could come in. That, I don't know if I'm allowed to say the cast member's name because I don't know if it's public awareness, but it's a good thing that he did anyway. But his wife also has started in the industry childcare services in studios down south. So we've got a couple of examples of those. One at Leavesden Studio Wonderworks, and one that they did through a mobile bus for childcare in Wales. So again, I believe there may be rumours of that happening in Scotland at some point, but again, I'm probably not allowed to say anything about that. But that's it's just an example of that. These two initiatives have come from CAS, and again, just saying about how we have a capacity as a whole industry to do things. We do this for those voices, so we are able to.
I think there's, and I'm going to turn to you in a moment, Karis, I'm just going to warn you. One of the things I was talking about this morning in another workshop that I was leading is the response actually of Creative Scotland around climate change has often happened because the cultural sector has been asking for stuff and has sort of led the way, and Creative Scotland has joined in. Rightly so. I don't think it should all come from the top. But I think there is an interesting, there's a role, I think, it seems to me, and tell me if I'm wrong, for Screen Scotland here, just connecting up, not maybe the different industries, that may be more for Marie-Claire, but some of the various parties that are involved in screen, like the film offices, the National Trust for Scotland, and so on. Do you see a role for you there?
Yeah, so I work in the Screen Commission, which has been running for decades now. Our role is more about locations and inward investment into Scotland, attracting bigger productions and ensuring that location filming in Scotland goes smoothly and goes well, and everyone's abiding by the law and has all the correct permissions in place. Touching on what you're saying about the infrastructure in the more remote areas, I think that's definitely when there's collaboration between us and Visit Scotland, the local authorities, Historic Environment Scotland, National Trust. We all cover the whole of Scotland, and it's kind of, I think, where tourism and film kind of feed each other in a way. When they filmed Highlander and The Wicker Man up in Plockton and over in Lochaber, the tourism that was going on there wasn't huge, so there wasn't much infrastructure there for the film crews. When they filmed the little bit of Braveheart that they did film in Scotland at Ben Nevis, they built a car park, which is now the Braveheart car park, which tourists use all the time, and obviously film crews, when they go back there, they have access to that. And I think it's that way. It's happened all over Scotland, where filming's gone on, and then there's been a mini tourism boom that's then grown the infrastructure a little bit, so that when film crews do go back there, there's slightly more hotels, there's slightly more facilities, there's maybe a bigger co-op, there's maybe a bigger Tesco, and the likes of the car charging points. I think that's where the tourism industry is going to really help us out, because local authorities and Visit Scotland, they're all also going to be pushing for electric charging points in all towns around Scotland. Hopefully every car park where people stop to take photos will also have a charging point, because there aren't that many roads in Scotland. Everyone goes to the same ones, and with the tourism boom that's gone on around the North Coast 500 and especially on Skye, I think that the infrastructure that's also going to be growing there to support tourism is going to mean that we can also tap into that from the film industry. But it's kind of, we also help advertise those places as well. I think it's that, just the cross collaboration and where industries cross over one another. I think it's, I realise we're kind of putting a lot of to do on on Marie Claire, but it's
she
kind
doesn't
of
need to sleep though.
I think it's
from working in film and TV.
yeah, I think it's like our making sure that all the conversations happen and all the communications there, so that the overlaps are happening in the right places and working for everyone.
I think from a Shetland point of view, certainly the show is really popular internationally. When I first went on my first trip to Shetland, I met off our Shetland fixer and went straight to the Lodbury, of course, Perez's house, and he took some photographs of my mum, you know. And next to me was a couple from Texas. This is November, so it's off-season, who'd flown specifically to see Perez's house and tour all the locations, and a couple from Australia, the other side, who were there to do the same. Shetland is a massive draw and a huge part of Shetland's economy now. But putting that to one side, one thing that as a production I don't want to do is be a burden on the community. So we take everything with us, partly because there are no suppliers in Shetland for a lot of the gear that we need. And we need to be kind of self-sufficient and not a burden on the community. So when charge points are put in there, you know, there needs to be not just enough for the local community, but a few extra for tourists and for visiting film crews. You know, because I wouldn't want to take away, and for us to have all our electric cars charging up in a big fleet, but have nothing left for the folk that actually live there. And I think that's an important balance as well to get right as we look into the kind of the future.
Yeah, it's a complex business, and there are so many different parts to this that actually I hate the word balance. It's easy to say we need to balance these off against each other, but actually it's about finding the way where they all come together in a complex whole that's greater than the sum of the parts. And I think that's the challenge for everybody here and everybody here. I think bringing all these things together, and you've touched really there, Louise, upon the social sustainability, which is such a big part of climate change work. Climate change is absolutely it's intersectional with equalities of all sorts. The people who are most affected by climate change, globally and locally, are those who are disadvantaged anyway. And generally, those disadvantaged people are the people who have least caused the climate change, so they've not caused the emissions. So it really very closely connects to just about every other social problem. And if there's a social problem in Shetland, in Glasgow, in Glenetiv, then it'll be exacerbated and made far, far worse by climate change. And so we really need to be careful when we're thinking about this, not to exacerbate those problems with mitigation efforts or adaptation efforts that actually make it worse for the people already having a hard time. But actually, I think, find the opportunity to to build a better society through this enormous transformation that we're making. I'm just going to see actually whether there's any questions from the audience. We've got about another 25 minutes, 23 minutes. There's a couple of questions at the back. There's a keen spot. Okay, well, there's a few questions. So just the gentleman and then the lady at the back.
Hi there, thank you for that and the information. I run a production company in Edinburgh, and when it comes to kind of TV and film, you can see kind of why people, aside from like the main reason of the world is burning and stuff like that, want to be environmentally friendly, because there's kind of the funding is more friendly for people that have kind of environmental factors and stuff. But a lot of the things that we do is kind of short form media. So there's Ad Green that is really good. But again, that's us choosing to do that and us actually then paying to offset our carbon. So when it comes to budget and stuff like that, we have to take that into account and we have to make the changes. And often that means that we will maybe go to either bands or music videos or kind of companies, and when we're speaking about projects, our budgets might be higher than others because we're considering that. So it's kind of like, my question is, and I know that you guys wouldn't have the facilities to police it, but is it something that you're thinking of? Is there a way for you to incite people to be more environmentally friendly with short form media that kind of doesn't, like it wouldn't cost them money kind of thing? Is there a way? I don't know.
I've got an answer to that, but I know Mary Claire wants to say
I
something, and I want to hear from the other two as well, maybe, if they've got anything to say. Mary Claire.
I suppose I can touch on it a little bit in the sense that I think in Scotland we're looking at, my kind of thinking about it just now is like two different strategies. So one, the majority of our industry is smaller scale projects. It's a lot of television production and smaller scale features. So I think in Scotland, in relation to our systems approach to it in general, I think we can create something that's very tight knit and resource sharing and efficient quite quickly, relatively speaking. And then we have another strategy that kind of deals with the big budget inward productions, which is different to what you're talking about. So I think the latter of that is something where we would expect a decent kind of financial commitment from those massive, I mean, we're talking about like $100 and $200 million productions, but this is obviously very different to what you're talking about. So I think on one side, the smaller scale productions are naturally less emitting and less intensive because they have less resources to go around. I think in terms of what you're talking about in terms of the cost of using a service like AdGreen for your specific short form production, I think I don't necessarily have an exact full answer for that specifically, but what I would say is that sustainability is currently a competitive advantage for businesses. So Netflix have said that they're going to be net zero by the end of this year, which is amazing. I mean, I haven't, there's probably things to be said about, obviously they're doing a lot of carbon offsetting rather than just mitigation, but just even for them to say we are doing this, it inadvertently shames all of the other studios, because then you look at the other ones, it's like, well, what's your so I would kind of use that sort of framing when you're speaking to musicians or whoever to say, well, these are the guys that are really popular, and especially my generation's very aware of it. I know the generations that are coming below us are even more aware, because they're going to be even more affected than myself or the generations above me will be. So I think framing it and looking at it in that way to say, well, you want to be seen to be ahead of the curve, and it's also like, and the sad reality of it is the one thing that actually joins everybody together, because we're all going to be affected by it in some way. Obviously some groups of people will be more disadvantaged than others, but literally there's nobody that will kind of not be affected by it in some way. So I think, to be seen to be ahead of it rather than just complying because you have to.
Louise, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, it's very different for your perspective, short form, to series producing. But from my point of view, obviously we're in an organisation, ITV, a massive kind of global provider of broadcasting content. And their commitments filter down to each production, including Shetland, not just for drama, but for unscripted content as well, entertainment. They have a massive policy and a massive initiative. Very interested in what you said about Netflix, my goodness me. I mean, we came up with our carbon offset figure for Shetland, so we know exactly precisely what we owe to offset our carbon. And from my point of view, obviously, we had to make certain decisions that weren't sustainable, i.e. flying cast and crew to Shetland, because we couldn't ferry everybody up and down. I don't know whether that's helpful, but I think, don't give up, I think. Just keep plugging away because, like I said, I think the will is there from quite a senior level within the business, as well as obviously from Screen Scotland and now Marie Claire. And I feel that things are changing, even from when I've been in the business 25 years. 25 years ago, this wasn't even on the radar. And before that, I was in the Navy, and that's another story anyway. I won't go there today. But it's very interesting that our business really does need to. It is reforming. It's happening around us, but my frustration is it's happening in a small way, and I want to do more. And I know of other producers like me.
Karis, do you want to say anything? You don't have to.
Yeah, no, I'll happily chat. I'd say it's that we were in a really awkward moment of our evolution into net zero at the moment, because we have a lot of people that are interested in being sustainable, but then, like you say, it's going to take everyone and everyone being on side. And when you're pitching for projects, it's obviously money talks, and clients are always going to go with the ones that are most financially viable for them. It's a shame that you're the only one adding in the sort of greenness to your budgets. I think it will get to a point where others are also adding it on, and it'll level out the playing field a little bit. But yeah, until everyone's there with that attitude, maybe take it out and ask if they would like to add it on, or, I don't know, be more creative with how it's presented within the budget until that time comes, because it is going to be a journey, and getting everyone to be on the same page and in the same mindset is going to take time. And
I'll come to you in a minute. I would say, make it a premium offer. And I would say be proud of it. And I say this, I used to be a freelance theatre director, and I stopped doing that to set up Creative Carbon Scotland. And a few things to say. One is it's been actually the most interesting and lively time of my life. The last decade have been the best decade. So I think there's great stuff to have doing it. But also I think there is, if you ask people, then actually they will join you, and it takes leadership. So I would say stand up there, be proud, and say this is what we do. This is why you want to come to us. And just on that, there's a role here for Screen Scotland and the rest of us as well, which is that the report that Marie Claire and I worked on said that there are different horses for different courses. For where Screen Scotland gives out money for productions, it can put requirements on the people who get the money. So if you don't get the money unless you do X or Y. But actually the other side of this is making it the easiest place, the best place to make a green film. So actually if the crew are trained, if the industry sectors, the suppliers are there and so on, it'll become easy for you to do that. And so I think there's work going on. It won't be immediate. There's work going on to make it easier and not as expensive for you to do that. And I think if you say this is the best thing, others will join you. The Edinburgh International Conference Centre has done loads and loads of work on greening its activities, and it realised that it couldn't do any more until the clients that it was renting space to started being green. So they now offer, you can have your basic, or a bit more money, you get the green version, and everything, you get recycled paper, you get delicious vegan food and what have you. And they make it a premium service, so I would recommend that. Are you two together? Are you, or are you just sitting next to each other? Is it the same question, or?
No, it's different.
Okay.
Thank you. I actually have two questions. My first.
I'm going to allow you one, actually, because there's a lady there who wants to speak as well. So.
Okay, I'll pick better. My one is to Marie Claire. So I know you have all of these wonderful goals that you're hoping to do. What is your sort of time frame for when you're wanting to achieve some of these, like the list of Scottish suppliers who are sustainable and things? What's your sort of time frame and like goals for that?
So in general, my role is actually only funded until next summer just now. So basically this first year is very foundational in terms of actually building on what we wrote in the report in terms of what's needed to really kind of go into more detail with that. So a lot of what I'm doing, I've got a good understanding of the industry itself, I've got a decent understanding of sustainability and environmental issues, but what I'm really figuring out the picture of in Scotland just now is these wider infrastructural policies and strategies for net zero in Scotland in general. So a large part of what I'm doing in this first year and a half is actually saying literally where the main areas of support are required from the kind of powers that be above our industry specifically. So it's a lot of kind of mapping and building that case for what's required in the future. So in some ways it's a kind of ongoing and never-ending mission, but on the other hand, I think what you've said about suppliers list, that's a very short-term, immediate need that we've got one version of it on our BECTU Vision website already, just as a kind of basic collection of what we've got at, just as a starting point, but that's going to be built on as a kind of immediate need within this year. So literally, hopefully, even in the next few months to just get that delivered to industry in a very short-term way. So it'll be a variety of all of it, and obviously, like, what I realise is, the thing is that it covers, as been explained and put into context at the start, that because the transition to net zero and because our industry itself covers so many sectors and systems, it's like some things will push forward more quickly, and we can also contribute into things to actually help make the change happen, even from, we can feed into things and actually help the wider infrastructure change faster than it might have done, and give that level of detail that perhaps the policymakers and things haven't even thought about in relation to our industry. So it's a bit chicken and egg in a way, but I'm kind of feeling that out and finding that out as I go in some ways. So
before you come in, Mary Claire's job's only until next summer, so you could all write to Screen Scotland, your MSP, Glasgow City Council, Visit Scotland and others, just to say what wonderful work she's doing, how important this is. And I actually mean this. Yeah. I think if there's support all around, then, and we've got a new Minister for Culture who attended a meeting I was at the other day, who's very keen and interested. So I genuinely think if you've got any leverage, then use it. The funders are, at the moment, Screen Scotland, Glasgow City Council, the Scottish Enterprise, Highlands Islands Enterprise, and South of Scotland Enterprise. But I think Visit Scotland ought to be in there in some way. Maybe they're not. So, so just use that leverage that you've got. And now to the lady in the brown jumper.
Hi there. Thank you so much. Very timely conversation. It's occurring to me as we're talking, it kind of touches on what this gentleman was getting at as well. Is there any thought among the funders, and I think Creative Scotland could be a major player in this, to establish a kind of green fund of sorts that productions could apply for to help bridge that gap? Because I think what you're touching on is it is, sadly, it shouldn't be this way. The green choice is often the financially higher one. And if you're working on a micro production, small production, £15,000, say, if I want to send 15 of my cast to London and back on the train, that costs substantially more than taking a car. Now, my ethics say I want to make that train, take that choice, and I'm sure, it's the same. But if we're only allowing ethics to guide these choices, it needs money to back it up. Any thoughts on that? And forgive me if such a thing already exists, but my instantaneous thought listening to this is, surely we could get some sort of funding going as an avenue for, to sort of begin shifting that culture.
Yeah, I think this one's for me. No, absolutely. I think for us as Screen Scotland, there are many different funds, but they're not actually available to everyone that's filming in Scotland, because if you're making music videos, if you're doing commercials, you don't necessarily fall into what's a creative fund. So definitely there needs to be support there, and whether it's from us and Scottish Enterprise, it could come from all over the place, but allowing everyone to be sustainable, because a lot of people do come to film in Scotland, but they don't even look at the Screen Scotland funds because they're not eligible. So on our journey to net zero, there could still be people landing in Scotland and doing things really unsustainably because they can't afford to do things any other way. And yeah, for the sort of sector here, it's just absolutely about having the support, the tools and the infrastructure there and available. And yeah, maybe there needs to be publicly funded tools available so that that are available to everyone, and not just high-end TV and not just the big budget features. But also like just touching on the infrastructure I was going to mention earlier, I'm just going to take it while I have the mic, that having the infrastructure and allowing companies to adapt before policies are put in place, and just the order that everything happens in, because we don't want anyone to be left behind. We don't want facilities and suppliers that weren't able to adapt to becoming sustainable to be left in this unsustainable bucket that nobody wants to look into. It's making sure that there is enough support for absolutely everyone, whether you're a short film, whether you're a student film, whether you're making commercials, whether you're making music videos. It needs to cover the whole industry and not just be focused on high-end TV and feature films.
And I've just been working with Creative Scotland as a whole on their climate emergency and sustainability plan. And again, Karis, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me there is a changed attitude there. There's a willingness actually to see things differently, and to that's telling me we're getting near the end. That there is a willingness to change the way that Creative Scotland and indeed Screen Scotland do things, because it's a changed world. So I'm fairly optimistic about this actually, but I don't think it's going to happen straight away. Creative Scotland, Screen Scotland, they're behemoths that, they're juggernauts that take time to turn round. And I say again, it was because Creative Carbon Scotland and the sector were telling Creative Scotland that actually something needed to be done, that so much has been done in the arts bit. So I think you need to rise up and ask for it and be proud of it. As I say, I think it is a competitive advantage. It'll be increasingly required by ITV, Netflix, and others. So I think there is going to be an unsustainable bucket, and that's for the people who are losers, actually, if I'm brutal about it. If they can't make the change, they're not going to fit into a 2045 zero carbon Scotland. Are you scratching your head, or do you want to ask a question?
Point and a scratch. Sorry, I think the lady before was also.
All right, it was first, sorry.
Hi, Barbara. I hope you can hear me, and I also lost my voice. I apologize. I actually have a few questions because I came down from London, but I also.
I think you came up from London.
Yeah. I travelled. And I just want to ask you, because it's all exciting it's been happening, and I also. I also run my own productions. I hire people, etc., and I'm trying to do my bit as much as I can. But also, when it comes down to thinking what actually is happening now in politics and in the world, and and many productions being so affected by the COVID, and all this kind of a plastic of a production for testing, and like not being able to use cutlery and all these things, like. I just would like you to maybe like comment a little bit about this, and also when it comes down to things like what's happening in Ukraine and with Russia and all the gas prices going up, and which means the traveling will be going up, the petrol and all this. And just said here. So I kind of I'm just thinking like, what do you think will be happening now when it comes down to the current climate? Of the politics, and how this influences now our and then also
I'm going to stop you there actually, because that's a good question. I want to go to Louise perhaps, because you're dealing with this at the moment.
Yes.
Absolutely, yeah. No, we had a 50-odd page COVID protocol document for Shetland that was specifically designed. It was based on the broadcaster's kind of general recommendations, but it was specifically designed for our show. No, you're absolutely right. Our COVID had a negative impact for sustainable production in many ways, which was frustrating for us. First of all, you're absolutely right, we had a lot of single-use plastic, PPE, face masks. We would wear the normal face masks at unit base, but we would wear the kind of the FFP2 heavy kind of masks, and folk would have to change their masks regularly as well. So there was our landfill footprint was going way up, and I felt uncomfortable about that, but you had to prioritise. It was people's health and safety that had to be put first. Another way in which COVID negatively impacted us was that we couldn't car share, so we had to hire a lot more cars, specifically on Shetland and back in Glasgow, in order to ferry folk around. There were some people who were in the same COVID bubble that could share, but generally we couldn't. You know, and we lost out creatively then as well.
What's the but? Because there is a but. Well, I'll give it to you if you don't have it
Well, the
yourself.
but is that this will come to an end. You know, we have, the 21st of March, things are opening up in Scotland. However, this will only end for the industry and for production when the insurers say it will end.
Okay, so I'm going to give you another but. What COVID demonstrated is that if we want, we can make an enormous change to everything. And the film industry did that really, the screen industry did that remarkably quickly and effectively. Now, there are all sorts of downsides to that, but I think it also shows that if there's a desire and a need, then you can shift. And I would argue that climate change is about 100 squillion times bigger than COVID. It is absolutely existential. So I think what we need to do is understand that we need to do the same as we did for COVID, for climate change, but do it in the right way and get the benefits. So I think that's the big but, because we've learned so much. We've learned, we know we can adapt, we know we can change processes, we know we can do things in different ways, and we can apply that, not those particular things, those are a detail, but actually we can apply that fact that it hasn't always been done this way. It was done differently 2 years ago, for goodness sake, and we can do it differently in next year and the year after that and the year after that. That's the big lesson from COVID, I think. And the Ukraine question is a different one, but again, I say it's unspeakable, but it is not existential in the way that climate change is. More people are dying probably every day of climate change, even now.
I've got something to say to that, actually. The sad reality of our industry is actually anytime our industry goes into recession, our industry booms because everybody wants escapism. And I think obviously it's completely horrific what's going on in Ukraine just now, and the news is just completely depressing, and we don't know, it's going to go on for a long time, whether it's just in Ukraine, whether he spreads his crap into wider Europe, or if it is going to escalate into something terrible. We don't know this yet, but the point is it is depressing, and it's like, and with what you're saying about like fuel prices and economics, if that has a negative impact in terms of like a recession, that will mean that our industry actually, sadly in relation to why it's happening, but it means that our industry will be booming, so it'll be a more profitable industry. So that's actually the time in relation to our industry to say, you're making a lot of money, this is the time to take the responsibility and the corporate social responsibility too. I mean, what is the mathematics of putting like 4 to 7 million refugees from Ukraine alone across Europe? I mean, it's a huge amount of need for resources and support for people to live in other places. So it's just, in terms of...
I'm going to stop us there because we could... I'm going to stop.
My question was about the patrol, like how this will affect the traveling, transport, and then
I think it is, of course,
to kind of improve the kind of cutting down the costs. The costs will go up.
There's no question it's going to have those impacts.
But I suppose this is something that we can discuss. Or everyone will have to adapt as things are changing. Really.
Yeah.
So this is, I think, is the answer, and also like.
I'm going to stop you because there's a lady here who wants to ask a question, and there's a lady over there. Were you earlier? Yeah. Okay. We'll have to go to her first. Sorry. Hang on. There's a microphone.
Hi. I totally relate to the overwhelming feeling of going into production and seeing the amount of unsustainability. My first job in the industry, thanks to BECTU Vision, I was sort of emptying the confidential waste bins and was overwhelmed with the amount of paper that we use. And I think COVID's great because it's cut down to some extent, but people are still, having hard copy call sheets and things like that. My question is to do with food sustainability. As a child from parents who had food poverty when they grew up, it was really kind of distilled into me, eat everything on your plate because people have it worse than you. So as a runner, going to food trucks and being like horrified with the amount of food waste at every point in the day, breakfast, lunch and dinner, It was maybe because I've sort of stepped out of the world of film and TV production now. I'm a writer and trying to get my own things made, so sustainability, whenever I think of my filmmaking, is like number one, and how I want to sort of not create a bigger mess. So my question about food sustainability is that we have so many productions maybe ongoing in Glasgow, not only Glasgow but Edinburgh as well at the same time, and I just wonder that if we could maybe, I don't know, like have conversations with all of these productions at the same time and saying, right, okay, can we come to your production base, get all of the lasagnas that no one's eaten today, and can we go out onto the streets of Glasgow and can we give this as hot food to people? I'm
going to stop you there. I think that's a great idea. I'm not sure we've got the answer here unless Mary Claire is writing something down.
Well, I've got a quick point. Just a really quick point. There are some positive spin-offs to COVID, which I referred to earlier, and another one was less food waste for us because we had to pre-order all our meals the day before, rather than there being, the buffets and the endless choice. You had 3 options, and that's what you went for, and very little was wasted.
And I bet nobody complained either.
No.
Because they complain about the food even though there's loads of it. So
Okay, you haven't got the microphone. You're not allowed to speak. Mary Claire.
What I was going to say was actually we had a conversation earlier in the year with Olio, the food waste company. So they're actually really interested in moving into the film industry. I'm not yet sure fully how the model would work because obviously it's reliant on volunteers showing up and picking up that food and then distributing it to whoever they want. So I'm trying to figure out how it would work, how it would be effectively implemented in the industry, because obviously we've got such short timeframes of when it's available from. But the other people I've been speaking to where this has come into conversation is with Zero Waste Scotland. So they've got quite a big domestic food waste initiative on the go in working with the Scottish Government, so there might be some sort of crossover there, but again, because I'm just so early days into the role, that I'm not exactly sure what the right route will be, but that's 2 areas that I'm aware of things already being done.
It's a good example of the challenge, the sort of logistical challenge of bringing all the bits together, the moving parts together. I think we've got to stop, which is why I was shutting you up, so my apologies. And I'm sorry we haven't managed to give you the slot. Can I thank Louise, Mary Claire and Caris enormously, because I think that's been a really interesting discussion. We didn't get through half of our questions on the sheet. But thank you very much for your questions and your attention, and indeed for coming, because this is a really crucial topic. And we need more discussions like this, and you need to bring your friends next time. So thanks very much for coming, and enjoy the rest of the festival.